Hey everyone, thanks for coming back to Test Tube Plus again today. I am Trace, and this is episode 2 of 5 in our series on blood. Blood is great. I mean, aside from keeping me alive, it's also really interesting. We're talking about what blood does, and blood diseases, and treatments, and blood types, and why that's important. We're even going to get into the future of blood and maybe synthetic blood later on. So make sure you come back for that, subscribe. If you're not familiar with Test Tube Plus, this is a show where we take a big science topic and we break it into a series of chunks so we can all understand it a bit better. So if you're new, welcome. I'm Trace. Otherwise, welcome back. So sometimes blood goes bad. It's not necessarily that something is wrong with it all the time, but there are blood disorders. Some you're born with, some you can acquire. The most common type of blood disorder is anemia. Probably heard of this before. According to the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, over 3 million Americans are affected by anemia. And the main component, the culprit for anemia, is red blood cells. Actually, a lack of red blood cells, to be more specific. As we mentioned earlier, red blood cells carry hemoglobin, great word, throughout the body. And attached to that hemoglobin is oxygen. And when there aren't enough red blood cells, or if they aren't working properly, or if they don't pick up enough oxygen, they don't distribute that throughout the body, and that makes you feel tired. Actually, not just tired, you feel exhausted. The most common symptom of anemia is exhaustion. Another common blood disorder has to do with the platelets, with clotting. When you cut your finger, you're essentially slicing a small artery, right? What is supposed to happen is the platelets rush in, they call for backup, they clog the wound, they're like, we got it, yay! Eventually, though, once the blood vessel heals, the clot dissolves and goes away. Sometimes there are disorders that affect that process. This is super dangerous. It's called a deep vein thrombosis, or DVT. It can happen to anyone. A clot can just be floating around the circulatory system, and when that clot hits the wrong thing, you could end up with a big problem. So if, say, a clot breaks off, travels through the bloodstream, and hits the lungs and blocks something, that's called an embolism, a pulmonary embolism in that case. If the clot is small, then you can recover. Sometimes it just pushes through with the pressure of the blood itself, but sometimes it gets stuck. If the clot is large, it gets blocked, and then the other side of that vessel doesn't get any blood, and it can cause cell death. As many as 900,000 people in the U.S. are affected by DVT, or deep vein thrombosis, and it can kill up to 100,000 people. Things can also get stuck in the brain. The clot doesn't just go to the lungs. Obviously, the lungs are a popular location for blood, but so is the brain. And if it gets stuck there, it can cause cell death as well, and that's really, really bad. That's a brain embolism, and it can cause stroke, which is when brain cells are damaged because of essentially lack of oxygen. There are a bunch of other blood conditions, like hemorrhages, blood leaking out of the blood vessels. This can get really dangerous when it's internal. There's hemochromatosis, which is high traces of iron in the blood, which creates problems in the liver and the pancreas. There's Sickle-Cell Disease, where the red blood cells literally look like a sickle and they're sharp, and it can cause pain and organ damage. It's genetic, but basically your red blood cells aren't the cute little donut shapes. It's bad. There's also things that can affect the blood externally, like malaria. We've all heard of malaria, right? Mosquitoes transfer parasites into you, but they're actually transferring the parasites into the blood, and then the blood carried around, and most people with malaria have flu-like symptoms, high fever, muscle pain, but it can get more serious and it can get more deadly. There are obviously a ton more of these things, but the more you think about it, the more you're like, wow, blood is super important, but once something gets into the blood, it can go anywhere in your body, right? So that's just another reason to protect and care for your blood. There are times when your blood gets affected by something that you can't really plan for, like cancer. Mostly when you think of cancer, you probably think of parts of the body, brain cancer, skin cancer, lung cancer, throat cancer, whatever, fingernail cancer. I don't know if that's actually a real thing. Don't quote me on that. But blood can get cancer too. It frickin' sucks. It's the worst. Leukemia is cancer of the blood cells. I did not know this. I knew leukemia was bad. I didn't know it was cancer of the blood cell. Basically, the bone marrow that creates blood cells starts creating abnormal white blood cells, and they grow faster than normal cells. The fast-growing white blood cells are not then able to fight infection the way they normally would. Eventually, the bone marrow won't produce red blood cells, they won't produce platelets, and it can cause, of course, problems throughout the rest of your body. There are several types of leukemia. It's broken down by how fast symptoms get worse and which blood cells are affected. Acute leukemia gets worse really fast. It's acute. People feel symptoms right away. Chronic leukemia is, repeated. It gets worse over time. It can take years to feel symptoms. Then there are the types of blood cells affected. So lymphocytic or lymphoblastic affects the lymphocytes, the white blood cells. Myelogenous leukemia affects red blood cells, platelets, and so on. And there are 4 different types of leukemia based on those criteria. Lymphoma is another type of cancer that is of the blood. It's actually a form of leukemia, but instead of affecting the blood-forming cells inside of the bone marrow, lymphomas affect the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system is crazy. Go look it up, or you can watch this video that I did about tonsils, which are part of the lymphatic system. Lymph nodes, which you've heard of, they're part of the lymphatic system. It's got its own circulatory structure of like lymph fluid. It's kind of insane. We could do a whole thing on it if you want, let us know. But basically, lymph nodes are like filters for your body. A lymphoma is when the lymph node cells or the lymphocytes multiply uncontrollably. And then there's Hodgkin's lymphoma and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Non-Hodgkin's is the more common type of lymphoma. It's actually the 7th most common cause of cancer-related deaths in the United States because blood is important. And when it gets cancer, it's bad. There are people looking to cure these diseases, and there are treatments out that work with some of these. Some of them involve like taking an HIV virus, modifying it to attack the leukemia, and then putting it into a body. It's happened. It's crazy. There are all sorts of different really awesome and insane treatments. Check us out over on DNews. We've talked about some of them. Essentially, what we're trying to get across here is the blood is everywhere. It goes everywhere in your body. It affects every cell everywhere. So when it does get sick, it's kind of crappy, which is kind of a downer way to end it. Tomorrow, we're going to talk a bit about cancer cures and how blood disorders can be looked at a little more in depth. So make sure you subscribe so you get all of our episodes this week and we can learn more about blood. Guys, we really love doing this show for you guys. It really helps us out. If you like, if you comment, if you share the channel with your friends and your family who are interested in science, or maybe you think they should be interested in science or you want to show them a cool science concept that we've talked about. If you've done that already, thank you so much. If you subscribe to the channel, thank you again. If you don't subscribe and you're listening right now, take a second, click the subscribe button. You can get these episodes from us every single week. We really appreciate it. Thanks so much. I'm Trace. We'll see you tomorrow on Test Tube Plus when we keep talking more about blood disorders.